U.S. Bishops' Conference. What's on the agenda this week and why a teaching document about Holy Communion is drawing widespread interest. Beyond roads and bridges. Learn about the impact of the infrastructure bill being signed at the White House today. Abortion hearing. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill weigh threats to long-standing pro-life protections. And Mass for the Poor. Pope Francis shares the power of God's salvation. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, November 15th, 2021. Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of St. Albert the Great. I'm Tracy Sable. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is assembling tonight for its in-person fall meeting. It is taking place this week in Baltimore, and front and center on the agenda is church teaching on the Eucharist. During their online meeting in June, the bishops voted to draft a teaching document on the Eucharist. It is set to include a section on the worthiness to receive Holy Communion. The motion passed, but not before a heated debate. And while the document, The Mystery of the Eucharist in the Life of the Church, will be considered, there are other items on the agenda. And joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Matthew Bunson, Executive Editor and Washington Bureau Chief for EWTN News. Matthew, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Good to be with you.
So let's talk about this draft document on the Eucharist. Can you refresh our memory on what was said?
Well, going back to June, in fact, even before June, there was concern among the U.S. bishops about the state of affairs among American Catholics and the levels of belief, for example, in the real presence, and a lot of confusion and even scandal among Catholics who are receiving the Blessed Sacrament unworthily. A lot of attention on the part of the media and even some progressive Catholic media was on whether the bishops are going to be trying to keep Joe Biden from receiving communion. That was never the intention of the document, but that really created the atmosphere for the debate heading into June and has remained, I think, part of the discussion and certainly expectations on the part of the secular media heading into this meeting.
Yeah, let's talk about the reaction from it.
Yeah, well, the reaction coming out of it was this idea that there's a small group of bishops who are trying to keep Joe Biden from receiving communion. As I was mentioning, the real concern of the bishops is a pastoral one. It's a theological one, and that is when we have, based on our own polling with Real Clear Opinion Research, that 50% of Catholics do not actually believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. This is a massive problem for us as a church. This document, this pastoral document that the bishops are planning to vote on this week, is one step in trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, and you know, we mentioned earlier that this will be in person, the first time that's been in person from 2 years because of the pandemic. Can you talk about how that might change the dynamic?
Well, the dynamic is going to be significantly different because they're together. As you say, it's the first time in 2 years. All of us watched the virtual meetings of the bishops. As somebody said, it's like a meeting with 400 people on Zoom. It's hard to have that kind of back and forth. But I think two things are worth noting. The first is that on this day where the bishops began their discussions, the day was almost completely held in executive session. So we don't actually know what that discussion was. We have a good sense that it was focusing on this document on the Eucharist. But then when we move into the discussions, the debates, and then the votes over the next few days, that dynamic in the room is going to be very interesting to watch because this is the first time in 2 years they've been together. But also we have this secular media interest in this meeting in a way that we haven't for many years.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that. Why such an interest by the secular media?
Well, precisely because we have the second Catholic president in Joe Biden, who nevertheless holds positions that are diametrically opposed to the teachings of the Church, especially on the preeminent position of teachings on abortion, also of gender ideology, as Pope Francis calls it. He has just met with Pope Francis in Rome. He made certain claims about what was said to him. So there's really intense interest on the part of the secular media in basically supporting Joe Biden in his policies, which we see from the secular media. But there's also that continuing discussion about where the bishops are as a body and whether or not they are willing to actually deny someone communion, which we know they can't, but the individual bishops have to grapple with this with their faithful in what is really a crisis point for American Catholicism, politically, socially, and spiritually.
Yeah, we only have about a minute left. So much more we can talk about, but I know that you're going to be there this week.
Yes.
I'm curious as to what you sort of have your eye on, because there's a lot of other things on the agenda as well. And what do you expect to happen?
A couple of things. First, there's obviously this document, but there's a related Eucharistic document, and that is an effort to spark what they're calling a Eucharistic revival, with the aim in 2024 of having a Eucharistic Congress for the country. That's going to be a big event in the life of the church, and it really goes together with this idea of Eucharistic coherence that we have to have, all of us do as Catholics. I'm also looking at the support that's been given to several causes for canonization coming out of Louisiana. Bishop Desotel is asking for support for a couple of causes, including a young girl by the name of Charlene Richard, who died at the age of 12 and was called the Little Cajun Saint. And then all the way from Hawaii, there's a request to support a cause for canonization for Ira Dutton, who worked with St. Damien de Veuster and also St. Marianne Cope. So clearly, the island of Molokai, where the lepers suffered and died, was this great powerhouse spiritually of Catholicism, but also of holiness. So those are one of the things that I'm really paying attention to.
Yeah, and we're going to be checking in with you throughout the week. So excited to hear more from you.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you so much, Matthew. Appreciate it. Well, today, President Joe Biden signed his $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure deal. Everything from broadband to electric vehicles to roads and bridges will get money for improvements, repairs, and expansion. But the victory lap comes as the Biden administration battles inflation, the ongoing pandemic, and growing threats from overseas. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, to be clear, the bill signed today is completely separate from the nearly $2 trillion Build Back Better legislation that opponents call a socialist wish list. Now, in just a few moments, my colleague Eric Rosales will have more on that. But today, for the Biden administration, it's one down and maybe one to go.
A South Lawn ceremony at the White House marking the signing of the infrastructure bill that passed Congress 10 days ago. Members of both parties in attendance.
This is what can happen when Republicans and Democrats decide we're going to work together to get something done.
The $1 trillion spending package goes beyond road repair. The White House calls it a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure and competitiveness that will rebuild bridges and rails, expand access to clean drinking water, and ensure access to high-speed internet. Also on the agenda today, a high-stakes meeting with China. Press Secretary Jen Psaki says President Joe Biden's virtual meeting with President Xi Jinping will address ways to manage competition between the two countries.
The president will express areas where he feels China should be taking additional action, should be behaving in a different manner that is more aligned with the rules of the road and the expectations of the United States and the global community.
China is accused of bearing down on Taiwan, developing a threatening new military posture, and imprisoning Uyghurs in concentration camps. Back here at home, a virtual outreach event for Native Americans. The White House is hosting a special summit. President Biden spoke to the group this morning.
We've also taken action to protect tribal lands, revoking the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, preserving and protecting a sacred homeland, including Bears Ears and the Grand Staircase Escalante. It's part of who we are as a nation.
Now, the president today also signed an executive order to address what he calls the crisis of violence against Native Americans. Part of it calls for federal officials to work with tribal nations to improve public safety and advance justice, focusing on sex trafficking, sex assault, and child abuse. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining us now is Amber Athey, Washington editor at the Spectator. Amber, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. We have a lot to get to, but first I want to talk about the latest poll from ABC News and the Washington Post, which has President Biden's approval rating at just 38%. Meanwhile, a recent CNN report alludes to tension within the White House and frustration on behalf of the vice president and her staff. What do you make of all of this?
Well, it just shows that the American people are paying attention. They know that the inflation that they're facing at the grocery store, the supply chain shortages, and all of these other domestic issues that they're facing are the result of the policies put in place by the Biden administration, and particularly the Biden administration's slow walking of the reopening of the economy, which has really created so many bottlenecks for consumers and made it harder for families to afford goods and make sure that they're able to put food on the kitchen table. So these polls are a basic reflection of that. And the American people know that the policies that the Biden administration is implementing are not helping them in the short or the long term.
I want to go on now to Capitol Hill. Senator Patrick Leahy, a Democrat from Vermont, announced today that he will not be running for re-election in 2022. The 81-year-old is the longest-serving senator still in office. I want to talk about the significance of his departure, as well as others who have recently announced that they're also stepping down.
Yes, I think Senator Leahy, his decision not to run for office again is going to be a huge blow to the Democratic Party and really a lot of the norms that we are used to in Congress. He was someone who worked in a bipartisan way with the Republican Party and really sought to cut across party lines in terms of the relationships that he would build with colleagues. And unfortunately, our politics has gotten so divisive over the past decade or so that type of leadership in Congress has really disappeared. So he will be a huge loss, I think.
Something else I'm going to talk about sort of on a different note. Last weekend, the FBI raided the home of Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe as part of an investigation into the alleged theft of first daughter Ashley Biden's diary. And over this weekend, the ACLU released a statement saying, in part, quote, the precedent set in this case could have serious consequences for press freedom. As a journalist, I want to get your thoughts on that.
It's beyond disturbing that this would happen. Usually journalists are allowed to protect their sources. They are not cracked down on by federal law enforcement agencies for reporting on things that are given to them. And in this case, the FBI has decided to chill the right of journalists to report on newsworthy items. And it's really disappointing to see. And I hope, and I'm glad to see the ACLU, which has taken sort of a leftward turn over the past few years, standing by Project Veritas' side. And I hope that that legal fight goes well for them for merely the precedent that it sets for all journalists out there.
Not a whole lot of time left, Amber, but I really want to get to this last question. Apparently, schools in Worcester, Massachusetts are teaching about gender identity and sex education for children as young as 5 years old in kindergarten. According to the Washington Free Beacon, it's part of the federally funded 3 R's curriculum, which stands for rights, respect, and responsibility. Wondering what more you know about this and also how parents there are responding.
Yes, a significant number of parents are making sure that their children are not exposed to this curriculum. It's somewhere between 13 and 15% of parents have decided to opt their children out because of the fact that this curriculum is filled with so much objectionable content for children of such a young age, not only talking about genitalia to children in kindergarten age, but also middle schoolers learning about things like pansexuality and transgenderism. So it's a really obvious political agenda that's being pushed on children who are young and impressionable. And I applaud parents who are taking a stand and trying to protect their children. This will be the next big fight on education, like we saw in Virginia on critical race theory. This will be the new frontier.
Amber, probably about 30 seconds left. Quickly, what are you keeping your eye on?
Yes, well, I'm very interested to see what happens next with the Build Back Better agenda, considering the infrastructure plan passed that will supposedly pave the way for progressives to be voting for the Build Back Better plan, which is a true $2 trillion progressive wish list. And Republicans, 13 Republicans voting for the infrastructure package helped to bail Democrats out of their own impasse negotiations. So that will be the next big fight coming out of Congress.
All right, we will leave it right there. Thank you so much, Amber. Always great to get your analysis.
Thank you.
Well, on Capitol Hill, House Democrats hope to pass their multi-trillion-dollar social spending bill this week. And for the first time in decades, pro-life protections are out. A recent hearing showcased the pro-abortion agenda of President Biden and his administration. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Recently, Democrats held a hearing about a woman's access to abortion. The hearing was stacked with pro-abortion advocates, each one trying to sell the idea that abortion equals a woman's happiness and self-worth.
For the thousands of people I've cared for, abortion is a blessing. Abortion is an act of love. Abortion is freedom.
Others claim limiting abortion access would be dangerous, especially to minority communities. Pro-lifers say more than 62 million babies have been aborted since Roe v. Wade became law in 1973. They say laws that protect the unborn are critical.
A world with fewer abortions is a good world. A future with more Americans is a good future. And families and communities who are offered hope rather than sorrow are powerful witnesses to the importance of laws that serve justice and the good of all persons.
The hearing was held as provisions in the Build Back Better Act are still being worked out. Current pro-life protections left out are the Hyde Amendment, which bans U.S. tax dollars for abortions, the Helms Amendment, which prohibits U.S. tax dollars for abortions overseas, along with conscious provisions for medical workers. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is urging Congress to reinstate these protections into the Build Back Better Act, writing, quote, "It would be a calamity if the bill facilitates and funds the destruction of unborn human life." House Republicans say Democrats are caving into pressure from party liberals.
I would be shocked if the number of Democrats who have always defended the Hyde Amendment, even the president himself, now to change their position really makes you wonder.
Senator Joe Manchin, a Catholic, says that he will not support the Build Back Better Act without the Hyde Amendment and other pro-life provisions. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, open for business. New developments for people hoping to travel to India amid the pandemic. And Vatican meeting. The president of Croatia pays a visit to the Holy Father. For the first time since March 2020, international flights have resumed landing in India. Tourists must still meet COVID-19 vaccination and testing protocols. The pandemic cut India's tourism business by more than 75% compared to 2019. The government plans to issue 500,000 free visas through next March as a travel incentive. A new anti-corruption party is favored to win Bulgaria's third election in 8 months.
Неработеща съдебна система или оставаща корупция.
Kirill Petkov co-leads a party founded only a few weeks ago called We Continue the Change, the pledge to bring transparency and end corruption in Bulgaria. A victory would give them a mandate to form a coalition government in Bulgaria's parliament. At the Vatican today, Pope Francis welcomed the president of Croatia. Zoran Milanovic discussed discrimination faced by the Catholic Croat minority. Catholics comprise some 15% of the population compared with larger Orthodox and Muslim communities. Instability still exists 26 years after the Dayton Peace Agreement. Pope Francis asked Christians to be tireless builders of hope amid suffering.
La speranza di domani fiorisce nel dolore di oggi.
At Mass yesterday for World Day of the Poor at St. Peter's Basilica, the Holy Father added that God's salvation is not only a future promise, but at work right now in our wounded world. Yesterday marked the 5th World Day of the Poor. Pope Francis began the festivities on Friday with a visit to Assisi. Pope Francis reminds the faithful those who do good on earth are making an investment for their future in heaven.
Ma è un inganno, perché il cielo e la terra passeranno.
He made the comments during his weekly Angelus address at the Vatican. The Holy Father says everything in this world will pass except for Christ and love, because God and his love for us lasts forever. Pope Francis also reminded the faithful not to gossip or take pride in themselves. People who do those things receive their reward on earth, not in heaven. Up next, Interreligious Talks. A report from Rome on an initiative to bring together people of different faiths. A group of church leaders and lay people met last week in Rome to discuss the future of interreligious dialogue. The conference was organized by the Vatican along with a Jesuit magazine and the Jesuit Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. The meeting celebrated the first year since the publication of Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti. Joining us now from Rome is Father Philipp Renczes, Dean of the Faculty of Theology of the Gregorian University. Father, welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. Tell us, how did the conference go, and also how many people participated?
You know, as a matter of fact, the conference was very successful venue, somehow exceeded my expectations, and especially for the attendees. It was a sophisticated crowd, I would say 100 people, diplomats and many journalists, and they all gathered around the question, what is new in the encyclical letter, the latest encyclical letter of Pope Francis, Fratelli Tutti, and there was a special emphasis on seeing the role of religions in this project, which is really in the Pope's heart, to make this world really a home for all people, including really for God to take really charge again in creating this environment where everybody can feel at home.
And I understand that Pope Francis also sent a message for the event. What did he talk about? What did he emphasize?
In fact, he sent a letter to this conference itself, very much expressing his gratitude that this conference would take place, because he thinks that it is so important that the various religions of the world get integrated into this project of his, certainly launched by him, but it needs the support of everyone. And one of the novelties, in fact, of this encyclical letter is that it somehow hints at the role, the active role that the religious leaders and, let's say, the world religions as such can assume in promoting this idea of working together, really it's always coming back to also what the previous encyclical letter Laudato Si said, that this world should become a home for every man and every woman in this world.
And as a representative of the Gregorian University at the conference, what did you focus on, and how is your university working on interreligious dialogue?
Well, thank you for these questions. First of all, what I pointed out was that it seems to me that the encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti, is in a way a form of becoming more mature with regard or compared to Laudato Si. It is a witness of the Pope's rethinking his project of this integral ecology at the light of more recent events such as the pandemic, also the crisis of media, fake news. So in some ways, the Pope has become more demanding in saying, first of all, that we all really should work together, not simply inviting us, but stressing the necessity of it, but also sending out warning signs against what a simple interreligious dialogue could risk into falling if it doesn't take care of certain premises. And one of these premises is really the claim of truth. And so in that sense, Pope Francis here, as it seems to me, has come back to the teachings of Pope Benedict and even John Paul II in a much more explicit way than had been done in previous encyclical letters, especially in Laudato Si.
Well, Father Renczes, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure speaking with you. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you so much again for having me tonight.
And finally tonight, 4 recipients of the Ratzinger Prize spent an hour on Saturday night discussing their award-winning academic work with Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. Two German scholars were presented with this year's award. Last year's winners from Australia and France also spent time with the Pope Emeritus. Seen with the group seated in the middle is Father Federico Lombardi, the head of the Ratzinger Foundation, which presents the annual prize. It was first awarded back in 2011. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.